So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday night Anamkara meditation program. Of course, with all my heart and with all my love, I welcome you to our program this evening. And thank you for coming. You are really the sublime essence of the infinite one, the divine. That's your true nature. That's who you are. And satsang, this kind of gathering, is the time to be able to dive into the direct experience of that through the practices, through the company of others, lending the power of their practices and commitment. So a very special evening that we have on these Thursday nights, and with all my heart, I'm so grateful that you come, bringing your divine presence, bringing your commitment to practice, the power of the practices that you do. So thank you. Thank you. So tonight is going to be a program that we're going to be taking up the questions that people have emailed me, because this is a fifth Thursday in the month, and so we get to add a kind of surprise or different program. And so tonight we'll get into some of the questions. But we're going to start, of course, with the opening mantras. And the opening mantras are the way that we use the power of mantra, the sound form of the divine, the infinite, so that it can help shift our consciousness, our awareness, our attention, literally our identity, out from all the stuff of the mind, all the content of the mind, and all the things that it's been absorbed in. Just put that on a shelf. And we're going to leave that aside for the next hour and a half or so. And the mantras and the opening mantras are a way of being able to both quiet the mind and bring our awareness to that fullness, that infinitude of being that is the very foundation of who we are. And so we chant the opening mantras, and then we sit for a few minutes in that stillness, the fruit of mantra, the detachment from the mind, whether it's quiet or not. Right? The mind can be active, but now we've added that boundlessness of space, the space of infinite awareness, so that even all the movements of the mind, they shrink down to almost nothing in comparison. They're still there, but now we've reclaimed the infinitude of being and come into kind of a proper perspective on the mind. So we'll start with the opening mantras. Shri Mata Kali Mahadevi Ki Jai Gajananam Bhotaganari Sevitam Kapita Jambo Palacharu Bhakshanam Rumasutam Shokam Vinashakarakam Namami Vigneshwara Parapankajam Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishate Om Shanti 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 Shri Mata Kali Mahadevi Ki Jai. So once again, with all my heart, I welcome you to our program this evening. And so tonight we're going to get into some questions that people have emailed. And in the traditions of the East, the questions, there were in ancient times, and really not so ancient, the tradition often was around teachers that a teacher didn't speak except to address questions. Very often, getting together in a sangha with the teacher, the whole thing might just be silence and meditation. And if a question arose here and there, then teachings would be given. So teachings were a way of, often also described as dispelling doubts, that there's a question, a doubt, an uncertainty about the highest truth that gives rise to a question. But we use questions as a way of helping to refine our discrimination, to deepen our understanding and our knowledge of what are the dynamics of sadhana, meditative practices, and how we live them into the world. So some of the questions tonight, you'll see, we can get into that through these. One of the questions had to do with what's the significance of the Bendu? And this person says, especially in regard to lower chakras, but it's not like the Bendu is different in lower chakras or wherever that is. If you look at some of the classic symbolic depictions of the chakras and the letters that go with the chakras of the Sanskrit alphabet, you'll see that there's a dot on many of them, and all the seed syllables for the chakras all have the dot, the Bendu. And so that's present in every single one of them. And that Bendu, we've talked about it sometimes in the past, to understand the Bendu in the Eastern traditions, in the yogic Hindu tradition, is really looked at as one of the sort of primordial symbols of the Shakti Shiva principle, this infinitude of being, consciousness, bliss, before it's manifested. And so it's this massive, but down to like no dimensions, really. It's like the single point before the Big Bang that we can talk about in Western, physics and understanding of how the cosmos came to be. It was this dimensionless point that had all the energies that's going to manifest the entire universe. It's completely unimaginable. That is the Bendu. And so that Bendu you see in many of the different mantras. You'll see it depicted in various other kinds of forms. We'll touch on that again in a moment, because this person's also asking about Yantra. And Yantra is the kind of visual form of the divine, the infinite. Mantra is the sound form of the divine or the infinite. And so we see that these forms that are particularly put to use in meditative practices are ways to go beyond form. So mantra is a sound form that arises out of the stillness, the silence, right? And then it also then goes back into that. So there's this movement in and out, in a sense, through that portal. It's the limitation of language that it gives a sense that there's an in and out. There is none. There's no in and out. This is all happening by consciousness, within consciousness, as consciousness. But we, when we're inhabiting this form of mind and body, we're in a sort of dualistic state, and so things appear to be separate and different when they're not. And the Bendu is an expression of that mysterious state of consciousness that we can enter into, where differences and sameness simultaneously exist, don't exist, and all that's beyond is there as well. Just completely beyond what the ordinary mind can literally even imagine. So Bendu, and there's also a well-known form of that called the Nila Bindu, and that's the blue Bindu. Nila is blue, so it's often referred to as the blue pearl. And it's also a classic experience that people can have through the awakening of this power of consciousness, Shakti Kundalini. That's our power of consciousness, to know the infinite in all these different transpersonal, transcendent, transcending the mind, so that we can have the direct experience. Because though the mind's consciousness is limited, that consciousness of our true nature is boundless. So it has that capacity to know it at all times in all places. And so the Bendu can appear as a part of that awakening and unfolding process. These things can come to be known spontaneously. Right? So it's not something that one has to try to study, visualize, and do all that. That is a path that was really based on self-effort. But the classic path of awakened Kundalini is just allowing that power to unfold the experiences that are going to be precisely the experiences we need. And those will include everything from very mundane changes in body, mind, everyday life, to experiences that unfold in meditative practices, or can unfold even eyes open and walking, of that presence of the divine, merger into that, different phenomena that can appear. But now, rather than cultivating a mind that again is just seeking to fulfill more desires and get bound by that seeking, that identification, that possession, we're saying, no, whatever the divine wants to unfold and give to us, that's the path of awakened Kundalini. That's why it's the path of grace. It's the path of being present and fully receiving the gifts that unfold in those moments. So part of that will then also, when and if that's going to be your experience of that unfolding, you'll have those classic experiences in meditation. And that's really being done then by that power of consciousness unfolding that experience directly for yourself. And we don't have to then try to cultivate a mind looking for another field of desires to get lost in for this kind of experience or that kind of experience. So we're just allowing that to unfold by the power of grace. And so that Bindu is, it's also there in the center of the Maha Yantra. And that takes us into another part of this person's question was, well, what do you do with a yantra? How do you practice the use of a yantra? And a yantra is described classically as a device for meditation. The great Sanskrit scholar and mythologist, Joseph Campbell, he would describe a yantra as this powerful machine for transforming consciousness. And very often at the center of a yantra, not all yantras have it, but many do, you'll find the Bendu. The Bendu is the focal point. So the way we use a yantra is we're completely absorbing our attention in that point, right? Completely absorbing our awareness, our attention, focused on that. So it's a visual kind of practice. And with that, there are particular mantras. So yantras, and there are many different yantras, will also have the classic mantras that go with the yantra. And so you would learn that. So when we've done the empowerment for the Maha Yantra in retreats, it takes some time. There's teachings, there's empowerment, there's practice, so that one can really get it. But on a sort of an abbreviated version of that is with the Maha Yantra, one can gaze at that intently, and while repeating the mantra Om Kali Maha, Om Kali Maha, Om Kali Maha, focused on that Bindu, right? You're really focused on that portal, and you're invoking that presence, and you're also invoking it with the awareness that I am that. Right? So one of the keys for mantra is that we are the mantra. We are the deity of the mantra. We're the sound of the mantra. We're everything about the mantra is the truth of who we are. So we have to dissolve that separation that there's a mantra, there's a person repeating the mantra, and there's the divine, the essence of the mantra. The same with a yantra. Right? So you're dissolving those boundaries and practicing that awareness. Now, a yantra also has various levels of meaning to it. So they're a complete teaching in themselves. So in the Mahakali yantra, you see the yellow, what's called a four-gated city going around it there. That's called a four-gated city. It's made up of two lines. And it's a symbolic representation that the way into, remember the most central part is the dissolution into the infinite, into samadhi, into pure consciousness of your infinitude. So the four-gated city is a way of symbolically representing that it can be approached from any direction, right? And so all four cardinal directions are represented by the four-gated city. Now it's interesting that you can see the gates don't appear to have an opening. And they're made up of these two yellow lines. Well, that's another level of symbol. And that's another message about the symbolism behind it. Because the two lines represent the barriers to entering that inner precinct of the yantra. And so they're not a physical barrier. It's not a gate to be opened that way. It's a gate to be understood because those two lines represent the past and the future. If the mind is in the past or in the future, it's not going to be present. The infinite, the divine, yourself, is known here and now, in the present, always in the present. The eternal present. So right away there's a teaching. Okay, if I want to get in there, I'm focusing. Part of focusing on the Bendu and on a mantra is that's helping to get your mind focused right here, right now. You have to let go of everything else. All past, all future, right here, right now. That then gets you into that inner precinct. Then you encounter in this yantra, there are these 8 flaming petals, lotus petals. And each one of those, you can barely see it in this painting here, but at the center, right along the line, right there, are 2 little lines sort of at the heart of each of those flaming petals. Now the flaming petals, they're flaming because they're pure Shakti, they're pure energy, they're pure consciousness. But they're also protectors of the now even further inner sanctum. And those 2 lines represent 2 ferocious manifestations of Shiva and Shakti called Bhairavi and Bhairava. And so each one of those has this Bhairavi and Bhairava associated with it. And they're protecting it from all directions. So now we have both the 4 cardinal directions and the directions in between. Right? That's the 8 petals. You go a step further, and then you come to the circle that is between the petals of the lotus and the black. That circle is made up of 3 lines. So it's another passage that has to be navigated. Those 3 lines, they represent the 3 gunas, the 3 qualities that make up all of creation. So very often you'll see classic yogis with 3 stripes of sacred ash, white ash across their forehead, and maybe a line, or there might be something else. But those 3 lines, they represent the 3 gunas. And that to get to the Sahasrara, the uppermost point of infinite being, we have to literally kind of burn those to ashes. That's sort of what that sacred ash represents. And what we're burning is not the qualities themselves, but our attachment and identification with those qualities that make up everything about the mind, the body, and our ordinary reality. Now you're getting deeper in. Then you're going into this black void, right? And at the heart of that now is the depiction of Maha. And Maha in the form of those red triangles. There's actually 5 of them, and they're concentric triangles. And then at the very center, in the very center of the centermost one, is that Bendu. And so those five triangles, they represent other phases of the energy of the mother, of Maha. And they're also associated with there's 3 corners to each, or angles to each of the triangles. So 5 times 3 is 15. And that stands and represents part of the shift of what's happening when we move from the new moon to the full moon and the 15 days in that cycle. And how that moon, again, that's another symbolic representation of the divine feminine, and it's coming out and manifesting and then dissolving back in. So you can see something that just looks like, oh, that's kind of a nice picture, has level upon level upon level of meaning. And when you're meditating on that, that thinking about that disappears. That's not the important part. The important part is the invocation with the mantra and your complete absorption in that center point, that Bendu. And so you would say that, and often you would say it out loud, faster and faster, louder and louder, focused entirely on the center of that yantra. And then you'd reach a point of like a crescendo with that chant, and then you'd stop and close your eyes. And what you'll see is, of course, the image of the yantra continues. And now you're in sort of the subtle body of the yantra. And then that's going to dissolve into the blackness, the stillness, the Bendu, the transcendence, dissolving all forms that you've ever been identified with. So you can see how a yantra is this extraordinary meditation device, and focuses attention, because we're always working with attention, no matter what the method or technique in meditative practice. What's the energy we're working with? Well, it's the energy of attention. So we're giving our attention in a very specific and focused way, both through mantra and through the visual form of the yantra, in order to let go of the ways our attention habitually just wanders the halls of the mind, identified with this drama and that drama, and opening this door and falling into this hole and whatever it's doing. No, the meditator, the yogi, says, no, I want to know the infinite. I want to know the infinite as everything, my own self as all of creation. And that takes that passageway through the Bendu into that infinite being. Then, eventually, you'll have the experience of that play of going in and out through that Bendu, right? And then there's no more in and out. They're just simultaneous. It's all happening simultaneously. All of creation, all of transcendence, transcendence including and embracing all of creation, unbound and unlimited by its assumption of form. So that's what unfolds through these practices. So the questions about the nature of the Bendu and how we make use of that and how we make use of it in the use of the Mahakali Yantra. And there are other prescribed kinds of yantras in various traditions, and they can have very elaborate pujas, ways of honoring them, specific things that one would do with them, specific ways they might be drawn on the ground, and you would sit in the center of the yantra and become the deity of the yantra. But they're all about how do we marshal the energy of attention get it completely absorbed in the form of the infinite, the mantra and yantra, in order for that to then deliver us back into our primordial state beyond all. That's the ultimate dynamic of the use of any kind of form, to enter the formless and then to know the beauty, the divinity of both. Nothing, no one left out. So, another question somebody asked, and they brought up two words that people may not be familiar with, but it was Donna and Dakshina. So this person's asking, are Donna and Dakshina the same? And their Dana is more typically used in the Buddhist tradition. Dana, we talked about Dana as one of the 6 virtues, the paramitas, a few weeks ago. And Dana is generosity. But it's also used as a word to denote what the Sangha, what members or students would offer to a teacher. So a dana, making offerings, that dana is showing the generosity and the valuing of what a teacher is offering. So back in Buddhist time, they would talk about that there was a term called Adana Raj. And Adana Raj is like a king, right? So the king of giving. So people wealthy would almost have like competitions, so to speak, in a gentle and loving way. Who was going to be the most generous? Who's going to be the most generous Dana Raj? Giving the fullness to support the teacher, making teachings available. Because another component of understanding it is, what's the nature of the teacher? That's the same in the Hindu yogic tradition with Dakshina. Dakshina too was an offering given to the teacher in recognition of the extraordinary value of what the teacher is giving everyone, and how that is received with great reverence and respect, and then it's being reflected in the gift. It's also, there's almost a subtle or alchemical component to it, because the giving was also recognized as, when we give, we've opened space in ourselves to receive. Right? So that the giving opened the doors of the heart and being to receive the gifts that are being transmitted through the teacher, the teachings, the practices, the mantra. So giving is also a way of opening and having the space to fully receive. Right? And so that is also an aspect of dana and dakshina. And it's both a way of recognizing what the value and how much that is appreciated from what comes from the guru, the master, the teacher, however one wants to think of it. And this opening that opens our heart to receive. Right? So, I remember reading about this in so many traditional texts, and it was very moving to me. And I have to say, what I received from Muktananda in just a brief encounter back in 1976 so moved me that about a year or so later I was on a plane heading to India to offer everything, because that was the tradition. Offer everything. I literally did. I literally withdrew everything from my bank account, gave away things, and I went to India to give everything to the master who had given me. More than I can ever say. More than I can ever repay. And of course, like a true master, he didn't take it. He wasn't selfish. He didn't need anything. He gave it back with blessings. So it's not about, what the teacher, it's like this openness of heart to give everything. Then you're in a place to receive everything, right? So Dakshina and Dana, even in the yogic and Buddhist texts, it's, it can be anything. Lord Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita, if somebody with a full heart, but has, so little, just offers a leaf, that's great dakshina. So, it's not about materialism. That's a pitfall for the mind. And that materialism distorts a lot of different practices. And it's an interesting observation, I think, around even Dakshina and Dana. There was a recognition that a real teacher, they didn't have an ego left to go out and, what were they going to do? Try to become famous? Who's there to become famous? They're going to try to get disciples? Who's there to, if there's that much of an ego self left, that it wants fame, glory, money, this and that, then they're not a teacher. They're just, teacher's there to serve. The dharma of a teacher is to simply teach and pass on what they've received. And so the recognition was then that the students, the dharma of the student was to fully imbibe the teachings, to become those teachings, the truth of that, the I am awareness. That's the dharma of the student. And the dharma of the student was also to support the teacher, to tell others about the teacher, so that others could receive these kind of gifts. So it all was done in this context of selfless service, right? Karma yoga, that fundamental selflessness in the giving and the receiving. Right? So that's also all a part of this dakshina, dana, giving, receiving, recognizing. Right? Now, another question that somebody asked, and this is one that many people can relate to. What should I do when I'm agitated or anxious? That is so fundamental to human experience, right? And so there are many different levels one can answer that. On the level of yoga and meditation, there are certain ways that we approach the mind. But there can be states of anxiety and agitation that need more than a practice of mindfulness or meditation. So the yogic and Buddhist approach to these practices doesn't exclude a person also getting help by specific therapies and different kinds of ways of shifting what's going on in the mind and the brain. I've done that with neurofeedback, biofeedback, psychotherapy. I mean, that's part of my clinical background. But also, even those kinds of techniques can be very much supported by the meditative practices. Because essentially, the meditative practices, they start out with, look at the very question. What do I do when I'm agitated or anxious? Who's agitated? Who's anxious? Not you. The mind might be agitated. The body might be agitated. You might feel anxiety. So self-inquiry as a part of meditative practice invites that stepping back and going, oh, wait a minute, what's agitated? What's feeling that? Who's feeling that? Where is that felt? Now I'm starting to shift my consciousness. I'm starting to remove my attention from being bound and identified with I am anxious. No, I'm Shiva. Now Shiva's seeing anxiety arising in this poor body and mind, and can watch with great compassion and invite the mind and body to slow and deepen the breath, to begin to calm itself down, begin to shift, to take refuge in mantra along with the practice of the awareness of I am this throb. Right? I became, for whatever length of time, I became the agitation of the mind. I became the restlessness of the body. And I can step back and reclaim the truth of who I am. And then be compassionately present with the mind and body and invite them, whether it's to gain greater insight, whether it's to strengthen the kind of self-regulation skills, How do we downregulate the autonomic nervous system? That's part of what creates those feelings, sensations, racing mind. It's part of our nervous system. Well, a lot of yoga practices, whether it's hatha yoga or pranayama, have to do with how to calm the body. Techniques that grew out of the study of yogis and meditators, like biofeedback and neurofeedback, are also ways of using technology to enhance those skills, to self-empower people, to regulate better and feel more steady and calm and even in going about everyday life. So there are many different ways that we can draw on the skills that are developed through the practices. But fundamental to them is this differentiating between who you are and what the mind is. Right? And so seeing that very often, one of the first things that is going to be efficacious when we're suffering in any way is to say, who have I become? Who am I now? Start to look at that. Because all forms of suffering have a limited identity as a part of them. And by being able to shift from that, we can bring the fullness of grace. That's the consciousness of your own divine nature. Bring the grace of that to both help the mind and body. We're not abandoning them, not saying, oh, too bad, you're suffering. No. We want to help the poor mind and body. But we're going to be in a better position to do that when we're nearer to resting in the fullness of our own self. And the closer we come to that, the more the agitation and the wrong identification that the body and mind carries melts away more and more. And that's why it's so critical to keep coming back to that state each day in meditation, throughout the day with mantra, to keep coming back to the awareness of what's the truth of who I am. I am the auspicious one. Right? I am Shiva. I am Shakti. I am Kali. I am Tara. So that becomes the ground of our being, because that is the truth of our being. Take refuge in that, the awareness of I am that. So that ends our questions. So now we've entertained the mind for a little bit, and now we get to the heart of the matter, which is leaving all the words and all the explanations and all the philosophies and all the description behind, and just rest in that throb of the infinite, the mantra of Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. So we'll be chanting Om Namah Shivaya, a slow chant for a few minutes, and then just rest in the stillness. That stillness is unbreakable. Even if the mind's moving, the stillness, unbroken. The stillness is always there, encompassing it all. All sounds arise out of stillness, dissolve into stillness. All thoughts arise out of stillness, dissolve into stillness. All feelings arise out of stillness, dissolve into stillness. All of the identifications we create arise out of stillness, dissolve into stillness. All mantras arise out of stillness, dissolve into stillness. All yantras arise out of stillness and dissolve into stillness. Enter the stillness. Enter the stillness. And you come to know it all. It's unspeakable, but the knowing gives you steady wisdom. So we'll chant, and then we'll sit in the stillness. Shri Kali Mahadevi Ki Jai.
Oh.
You are that consciousness, just watching. Thoughts come and go. Feelings come and go. Memories come and go. That vast spaciousness, the sky of awareness, holds it all, unmoved by movements of the mind, unmoved by movements of the body. Awareness, steady, spacious, free. Rest in that. Then we end with this prayer. And may all our practices truly benefit everyone. And may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. So the Eastern meditative traditions, they look at that, the origin of suffering, as this avidya, this primal ignorance, that we identify with what we're not, and we disidentify with what we are. We identify with the mind and the body and all its limitations and fluctuations, and we disidentify from the Eternal One, our own divine self. And how do we do that? The divine does it. It's beyond the power of the mind to do that or ultimately to break that. It's part of creation. But also part of creation is the gift of grace in each moment. Anugraha, grace, the unfolding of that consciousness of no, I am that. I am the infinite. We can enter that anytime, any place, and expand back to the true nature of who we are, the fullness of the love, the fullness of the compassion. And they have been lost by becoming something bound and limited in the moment. The quicker and more gracefully we can let it go, come back to the fullness of being, more fully we can live that into the world day by day. So I want to thank you for being those who are committed to doing that through your practices and your contemplations and living that into the everyday life that you lead. Bring that power of grace that both sets your mind free and then helps to better illuminate the world for others. So thank you. And thank you for the many ways you support Anamkara over the years. The e-newsletter that went out today, we were talking about, next week begins our 20th anniversary. So October of 2001 to October of 2021, we've been doing what we can to offer the truth, offer practices that bring people home to the truth of who they are and relieve suffering on so many levels and bring the fullness of love and compassion, generosity and patience into this world. So please join us next week and for our celebration of our 20th anniversary. And in the newsletter there was an explanation. If you'd like to help celebrate, just shoot me an email, some things you might want to share or say about your experience of what you've received through Anamkara over the years, whether it's e-newsletter or programs or the videos, whatever that might be. So please share those so we can share it with everyone. And we'll be back next week. We're heading into the dark season here in the northern hemisphere. I know Ben is in the southern hemisphere in Australia, so he's heading into summer. We're going to be heading towards winter, so it's getting darker here. But we've walked into the darkness together in the past and made it back into the fullness of light, and so we'll continue to do that. So please join us. So thank you for coming.